Now, in the wake of last year's skyrocketing oil and gas prices, the White House is now pushing changes to the industry's tax provisions, changes that would mean tens of billions of dollars in additional revenue under the White House fiscal year 2010 budget proposal. Clean Sky's Tyler Suiters talked to the chairman of the American Petroleum Institute about this tax proposal. And Tyler, this is a man with professional perspective on both oil and gas.
Safe to say that is true, yes, Susan. Larry Nichols is not only the current chair of API, he is also the chairman of Devon Energy in Oklahoma City, which deals with both of these resources. The company says its production is roughly 65% natural gas, roughly 35% oil and gas liquid. So yes, he does have good perspective. And I spoke to him yesterday after he was one of the witnesses at the Senate's Finance Subcommittee on Energy hearing regarding the White House's proposed changes to tax provisions for oil and gas producers. Chairman Jeff Bingaman was leading yesterday's session, and he asked to highlight the differences between oil and natural gas, asking these witnesses, in light of what we've seen over the last 6 months, should they have different provisions altogether? Should there be changes between the two rather than having them lumped together with the same numbers and the same rules? Well, Larry Nichols told me after that hearing that no. He said, quoting now, "I have never heard that proposal before. I don't think that makes any sense." Well, I pressed him just a little bit on that, especially in light of the divergence in prices we've seen earlier this year.
Well, the divergence certainly, causes a lot of concern for a natural gas producer, of which Devon is. We're the fourth largest gas producer. But those divergences come and go over relatively short periods of time. You wait 6 months, 9 months, and that could have flipped entirely. So you don't base long-term tax policy on these short-term erratic swings in oil markets and natural gas markets.
Some of your fellow witnesses testifying today talked about what they deemed would be a negligible rise in prices for consumers if these breaks were repealed. Is that the wrong set of numbers? Should you focus on the cost to producers rather than the cost to consumers?
As Chairman Bingham said, when you consider legislation like this, the administration's tax proposal, you need to look at its effect on jobs and its effect on price to the consumers. And both of those are going to be rather significant. If you take $80 billion out of our industry for the next 10 years, the only way we as companies can balance the budget is by reducing employees and reducing drilling. And if we reduce drilling, then gas production in particular will decline very fast, and the price to the consumer will go up. So the effect of this, the only effect that this bill can have, is a decrease in jobs and an increase in cost to the consumer.
And that's something we heard echoed time and time again from those opposed to this potential change, and that is this would increase a reliance on imported oil.
And it would do that. It would certainly increase the reliance on foreign oil and foreign natural gas, which would make us more reliant on countries that we may not want to be reliant on. It was interesting that in arguing for this, the administration was talking about arcane economic studies. The real world tells you that it's not going to react that way, which is why every senator in this hearing was challenging that. It doesn't make sense.
Senator Hatch brought up the issue of the cap-and-trade plan, the only time that was mentioned in depth during the hearing. What do you need to see to be on board with a cap-and-trade, or is it simply untenable from your position at API?
Well, the Waxman-Markey bill is untenable. That cap-and-trade bill is nothing more than a massive tax, $1.8 trillion on the American consumer, that masquerade as a climate bill. It's really not a climate bill. It does very, very little for climate. It's just a big tax bill. And it's a huge burden that this country cannot stand when we're in the middle of a recession.
What is the biggest selling point in your mind when you talk to the American electorate? Is it something as obvious as their potential rising costs for electricity, or is it a little deeper in the weeds, something like the effect on refineries here in the U.S. and domestic production?
Well, sure. You don't take $1.8 trillion out of all of the energy sources in the country, coal and oil and natural gas and everything else, and not have an impact. The only way we can pay that tax bill is lesser jobs and higher costs to the consumer. It's simple.
Do you think the issue of a windfall profits tax will come up once again? It seems like right around $80 a barrel for crude is the point where it may trigger, or at least the talk may trigger once again.
We don't have windfall profits, so I haven't heard that in a long time. I almost wish we were back to the point where we did have that concern, but we're not there, and we're not anywhere close to being there.
Larry Nichols and I also discussed the administration goals here for these energy and climate policies. He said if the White House wants greater energy independence and lower emissions overall, that changing these tax provisions will actually have the opposite effect. He said they will mean less domestic natural gas production and in turn more coal-fired electricity generation, and because of that, higher emissions. His other point, Susan, which you heard him allude to just a moment ago, we would get less domestic oil production and actually ramp up our dependence on foreign imports.
Right. So, Tyler, earlier today you reported that Chairman Bingaman was waiting on the White House for more details on the tax provision, possible changes. But how does the House bill already address some of those?
Well, there's one underway. We reported on it earlier this week, and this is based on a draft from House Natural Resources Committee Chairman Nick Rahal. This is a draft that was released late this spring and early in the summer, a white paper at the time, essentially. This is now the CLEAR Act. And the goal, according to the majority staff there, and I'll quote it directly, is to create greater efficiencies, transparency, and accountability in the development of federal energy resources. So a broad umbrella of topics here. The summary for the majority says this bill would raise onshore oil and gas rental rates for the first time since the 1980s. Also, and this is rather vague, it would repeal unnecessary royalty relief programs. One concrete fact that we have seen, Susan, change from what was the draft paper until this bill that Chairman Rahal unveiled is that the draft included about a 50% hike in royalty rates for oil and natural gas production. That royalty hike is not in this version of House Resolution 3534. So a change at least on that front.
All right, interesting. Tyler Suiters, thank you.